The first day of spring brought a quiet kind of excitement to Maplewood Elementary. The scent of fresh-cut grass drifted through the open classroom windows, and the sunlight danced across the faded chalkboards. Miss Clara Hayes, the new second-grade teacher, stood at her desk nervously straightening stacks of papers that didn't need straightening. She was known around town as the shy teacher, polite, gentle, with a habit of avoiding too much eye contact. Her voice was soft, her movements careful, as though every gesture carried too much weight. She didn't expect anything unusual that morning until Principal Dawson stepped into her classroom with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a gray jacket and a little girl clutching his hand. The girl, Emma Thorne, had big hazel eyes and dark curls that framed her face. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared at the floor. "This is Emma," the principal said. "She's joining your class today." Clara bent down to greet her new student. "Hello, Emma," she said gently. The girl didn't respond. Instead, her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. Clara tilted her head, confused but patient. She tried again, slower, clearer. But the child's expression didn't change. The father stepped forward. His voice was deep, calm, almost too calm. "She's deaf," he said simply. Clara's heart skipped. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she really saw him. Jacob Thorne. His name was familiar. The Thorne family owned most of the ranch land surrounding Maplewood. People said he was a millionaire who kept to himself since his wife died. His face was handsome but hard, carved with quiet grief and sleepless nights. He gave Clara a brief nod before turning back to his daughter. "I'll be back after school," he murmured, signing a few words with his hands before leaving. Clara watched him go, then knelt again beside Emma. She searched her memory. It had been years since she took that short course in American Sign Language during college, but maybe she remembered enough. Slowly, uncertainly, she raised her hands and signed, "Hello." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Emma's eyes widened. Her lips parted in the smallest smile, shy and fragile, like the first bloom of spring. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Clara moved through lessons with gentle patience, finding ways to include Emma, pointing to pictures, exaggerating expressions, writing short phrases on the board. When Emma giggled once at a drawing of a dancing cat, Clara's heart lifted. It wasn't much, but it was a start. During recess, Clara sat alone at her desk, reflecting. She felt a strange pull, not just toward helping Emma, but toward understanding the sadness she sensed behind those hazel eyes. She wondered about her father, the quiet man who carried so much silence in his posture. Something told her that their story held more than grief, something unspoken, something that reached beyond loss. Later that day, as Emma packed her crayons, Clara noticed movement near the door. A tall figure stood there again, Jacob Thorne, watching quietly through the glass panel. His eyes softened as he saw Emma laughing silently with another child. Clara didn't realize he was there until she turned. And for a brief instant, their eyes met. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if saying thank you without words. Clara blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She had no idea that simple gesture, one nervous, stuttering hello in sign language, would become the first spark of a story that would change all their lives forever. The days that followed Emma's arrival turned quietly, magical and quietly challenging. For Miss Clara Hayes, she discovered quickly that teaching a deaf child was not about speaking louder, but about listening differently. Every morning, Emma arrived early, slipping into her seat before the other children arrived. She sat neatly, her tiny hands folded on her desk, eyes scanning the room as though memorizing it. Clara always greeted her the same way, a smile, and the simple sign for good morning. Each time, Emma's expression brightened a little more. At first, Clara relied on gestures, drawings, and written notes on the blackboard. But soon she began learning more signs each night after school. Her small apartment was littered with open notebooks and sticky notes covered in unfamiliar hand movements. "Thank you, happy red friend." She'd stand before the mirror, practicing, her hands trembling at first, but growing more graceful each day. By the second week, something beautiful had begun. Emma was signing back, haltingly at first, but with growing confidence. She told Clara that she liked drawing, that she loved animals, that she missed her mother. Those small conversations, built of silent gestures, carried more emotion than any words Clara had ever spoken aloud. Other students noticed, too. They began learning a few signs to include Emma during group activities. The classroom transformed into a place of laughter and compassion, a language made not of sound, but of shared kindness. And yet, there was one person who watched this transformation from afar, Jacob Thorne. He started visiting the school more often, at first under the excuse of checking Emma's progress, but in truth he couldn't stay away. He'd stand outside the classroom door, his tall frame casting a shadow in the hallway, silently observing the woman who had somehow reached his daughter when no one else could. For months, therapists and doctors had tried to help Emma, but she remained closed off, lost in a world of silence and grief after her mother's passing. Yet here she was now, smiling, laughing, alive. And it was because of this shy, soft-spoken teacher who blushed when spoken to and tucked her hair behind her ear whenever someone praised her. Jacob found himself staying longer than necessary each time he came. He'd watch Clara kneel beside Emma, her eyes kind and focused, her hands graceful as they moved through the air. There was something soothing about her, something honest and unpretentious. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply caring. One afternoon, when the children were leaving for home, Jacob approached Clara for the first time since the day they met. She turned, surprised to see him standing in the doorway. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Emma hasn't smiled like that in a long time." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "She's a wonderful child. She just needed someone to listen in her language." Jacob nodded slowly. "I've tried," he admitted, his eyes shadowed. "But she barely looks at me anymore. I think she blames me, for her mother." There was a raw honesty in his tone that made Clara's chest tighten. She wanted to say something comforting, but all she could manage was a soft. Children carry what they can't understand. Sometimes love doesn't look like they expect it to. For a long moment, their eyes held. Two people bound by one child's silent world, yet speaking a language only the heart could translate. As Jacob turned to leave, Clara caught Emma's small hand waving goodbye through the window. The gesture was innocent, but the look Jacob gave Clara wasn't. It was filled with something he didn't quite recognize yet: hope. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara sat alone in her quiet apartment, practicing new signs under the dim light. She didn't realize that on the other side of town, a lonely rancher was doing the same, tracing the same gestures, trying to learn the words that could bring him closer to his daughter, and perhaps to the woman who had unknowingly begun to change his heart. It was a Thursday afternoon when Miss Clara Hayes stayed behind after the last bell, gathering stray crayons and worksheets left behind by her second graders. The classroom was still filled with the faint hum of the day, the smell of chalk dust, the fading echo of children's laughter, and a single drawing pinned to the board. It was Emma's, a stick-figure teacher and a little girl holding hands, both smiling. Underneath, in careful handwriting, Emma had written, "My friend Miss H." Clara smiled softly, her heart swelling. Teaching had never felt this fulfilling. For the first time, she wasn't just helping a student learn letters or numbers. She was helping her speak in her own way. The sun had started to set when the door creaked open. Clara turned, startled. Standing in the doorway was Jacob Thorne, tall and broad, dressed in a dark flannel shirt and worn jeans. His presence filled the room, quiet, steady, but commanding in a way that made Clara instantly aware of her wrinkled blouse and chalk-stained fingers. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, brushing at her skirt. "I didn't realize anyone was still here." He stepped inside, his boots soft against the wooden floor. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, his deep voice low and calm. I came to pick up Emma, but the front office said she's already with her nanny. I thought I'd thank you personally. Clara hesitated, unsure what to say. Up close, Jacob Thorne was even more intimidating, not because of his wealth or his name, but because of the stillness in him. He carried silence like armor. Yet beneath that silence there was something fragile, like the thin crack in a frozen pond just before it breaks. She's doing really well, Clara said, finally finding her voice. She's bright. She's kind. I think she just needed someone to meet her where she is. Jacob nodded slowly. You've done more for her in a few weeks than anyone else has in years. His gaze drifted toward the drawing on the board. He reached out, brushing his calloused fingers gently over the paper. She hasn't drawn anything since her mother passed, he murmured. Clara looked at him, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his tone. I'm so sorry, she said softly. Emma mentioned her once. Just one sign. Mother. He closed his eyes for a brief second as though the word itself hurt to hear. She stopped talking the day we buried her, he said. Wouldn't look at me. Wouldn't let me hold her. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, to ease the heaviness in his voice. But she was a teacher, not a healer. So she said the only thing that felt true. Sometimes silence isn't just emptiness. Sometimes it's where we keep the things too big for words. Jacob looked at her then. Really looked at her. The shy teacher with the soft eyes and the nervous hands. There was nothing glamorous about her, no expensive perfume, no confident air. But there was warmth, quiet strength, and sincerity. Thank you, he said finally. For seeing her, Clara smiled faintly. She makes it easy to care. As he turned to leave, a soft wind rustled through the open window, lifting the edge of Emma's drawing. Jacob paused at the door and glanced back at Clara. The fading sunlight caught his profile, outlining him in gold. If you ever need anything, he said. The Thorne Ranch isn't far. She nodded, unsure how to respond. Her heart fluttering faster than she wanted it to. When he was gone, the room felt strangely emptier, quieter in a different way. That night, as she lay in bed replaying their conversation, Clara tried to convince herself it was nothing more than gratitude. But deep down, she knew better. There had been something unspoken in his gaze, something that felt like the first spark of connection. And somewhere across town, Jacob sat in his study staring at his daughter's new drawing on the kitchen counter. He touched the word friend again and whispered to himself, You're lucky, Emma. You found someone who listens. He didn't yet realize he was the one who had started listening. 2. Spring melted into summer, and Miss Clara Hayes found herself waking each morning with a quiet anticipation she didn't dare name. Every school day began with Emma Thorne's bright smile, and though no words passed between them, their bond deepened with every sign, every gesture, every silent laugh. Clara had grown fluent enough in sign language to hold small conversations now. Emma would sign about her pony, her favorite storybook, and sometimes, when she felt brave, about her mother. Clara never pressed. She simply listened, her hands moving softly in reply. The other children followed their lead, learning bits of sign language from Clara's daily lessons. Soon, the classroom had become a place of inclusion, a little world where silence wasn't strange, just another way of speaking. Yet even as that warmth filled her classroom, something else was stirring quietly beyond it. One morning, Principal Dawson stopped by. Mr. Thorne's invited you to the ranch this weekend, he said with a knowing smile. He wants you to see where Emma spends her time. Says it might help you understand her better. Clara froze, the chalk slipping from her hand. The ranch? She repeated. I don't know if that's appropriate. The principal chuckled. Jacob Thorne's not a man who invites people lightly, Miss Hayes. Take it as a compliment. That Saturday, Clara drove out to Thorne Ranch, a stretch of land that seemed to touch the horizon itself. Fences gleamed in the sun, horses grazed lazily in open pastures, and the air smelled of earth and lilac. She parked her small car at the edge of the long dirt drive, feeling painfully out of place amid the vastness. Jacob met her at the gate, dressed in jeans and a white shirt rolled up at the sleeves. You found it, he said with that quiet smile that was becoming harder for Clara to forget. It wasn't hard, she said, glancing around. It's beautiful here, he nodded. It used to be my wife's favorite place. She loved the quiet. His gaze drifted toward the fields before he added, Emma and I haven't come out here much since she passed. I thought maybe if she saw you here, she might start remembering the good parts again. Clara swallowed. The simplicity of his words carried so much ache. Emma came running from the stables, her hands flying in rapid signs. Teacher! Come see my pony! She signed excitedly. Clara laughed and followed her, her shoes sinking into the soft dirt. For the next hour, she helped Emma feed sugar cubes to a gentle brown horse, laughing as the animal's whiskers tickled her palms. Jacob watched them from a short distance, his eyes soft. There was something deeply grounding about seeing these two, the shy teacher and his silent daughter, sharing a joy he hadn't witnessed in years. When the sun began to dip, Jacob offered Clara lemonade on the porch. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It felt familiar. She's different with you, he said, his voice low. You reach her in a way I can't. Clara looked down at her glass, unsure what to say. Maybe it's because I understand silence, she said quietly. Sometimes it says more than words ever could. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance yet, but the beginning of trust. The air between them held the same fragile beauty as the moment before a first rain, quiet, heavy, full of promise. As Clara drove away that evening, the ranch lights faded in her rearview mirror. But in her heart, something glowed brighter than the sunset, the realization that she had stepped into a world where silence wasn't lonely anymore. And somewhere on the porch, Jacob watched her car disappear down the long dirt road, wondering why her absence suddenly made the world feel so empty. The golden light of late afternoon bathed the Thorn Ranch in a soft glow when Miss Clara Hayes arrived again the following weekend. She hadn't planned to return so soon, but Emma had begged through a series of eager signs, and Jacob had sent a polite handwritten note. You're always welcome here. The ranch had a way of making her feel both peaceful and exposed. The open fields stretched endlessly, and the silence carried a kind of truth that small talk couldn't hide. Jacob greeted her at the porch with his usual calm smile, though his eyes seemed more tired than before. Emma's been waiting all morning, he said. She wants to show you something. The little girl ran out moments later holding a small, worn photo album. She guided Clara to the porch steps and opened it carefully. Inside were pictures of a beautiful woman with Emma's same dark curls, smiling beside Jacob, holding a baby, riding a horse under the same golden sky. Clara hesitated. Your mother? She signed gently. Emma nodded. Her smile trembled, and for the first time, Clara saw tears gather in her eyes. She looked toward her father, who stood at the porch railing, his back to them, staring into the distance. She doesn't talk about her much, Jacob said quietly without turning. I can't bring myself to either. Every time I try, I just can't find the words. There was something in his voice that made Clara's chest tighten. She set the album aside and walked toward him. You loved her very much, she said softly. Jacob's jaw tightened. She was my balance. Everything good in Emma and me came from her. His eyes dropped, shadowed by memory. After the accident, Emma shut down completely. I thought time would heal it, but instead, she started avoiding me. Sometimes I wonder if she blames me for what happened. Clara's heart ached for him, for both of them. Children don't blame with reason, she said. They just carry what they feel. They look to their parents to know how to grieve. If you're holding everything inside, maybe she learned to do the same. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. A man who had built his life around strength, but was beginning to feel its loneliness. They stood in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The sun sank lower, painting the ranch in shades of amber and violet. Emma played with the horses nearby, her laughter, silent but bright, floating through the air like music that only the heart could hear. Jacob finally spoke, his voice low. You have a gift with her. with silence even. I've spent years trying to fix things with words. Maybe I was never supposed to. Clara smiled faintly. Sometimes listening is the only way love can speak. He looked at her, and something softened in his gaze. A flicker of gratitude, of connection, of something deeper he wasn't ready to name. As evening settled, Clara prepared to leave. Emma hugged her tightly, signing, "Come again soon." Jacob walked her to her car, hands in his pockets, eyes on the gravel road. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "For giving her a memory that doesn't hurt," Clara hesitated before replying. "You're giving her that too, Mr. Thorne. You just don't see it yet." He nodded but didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, warm and heavy with unspoken emotion. When she drove away, Jacob stood watching until the last glint of her car disappeared over the hill. Then he looked down at his hands, strong hands that could build fences, train horses, and command an empire, yet trembled slightly when he thought of her gentle voice and steady eyes. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Jacob sat alone by the fireplace. On the table beside him lay the photo album, and next to it, a piece of paper Emma had drawn that afternoon, 3 figures holding hands. Daddy, Mommy, and Miss H. Jacob stared at it for a long time before whispering into the quiet, "Maybe she's healing, and maybe I am too." By early autumn, the bond between Miss Clara Hayes, Emma, and Jacob Thorne had become the quiet heartbeat of the small town. Every Friday, Clara would drive out to Thorne Ranch to help Emma with her studies. And though her visits were meant for the little girl, everyone could see that something deeper was growing between teacher and father. At first, it was harmless talk. Mothers at the grocery store whispering behind displays of fruit, curious glances in the teacher's lounge. "She's spending quite a lot of time at the ranch," one teacher murmured. "Must be nice to have the attention of the richest man in town." Clara overheard the comments one afternoon and felt her cheeks burn. She tried to ignore them, but the words followed her like echoes. She knew what small towns were like, how they spun kindness into scandal when the story was too quiet to notice. Still, she couldn't bring herself to stay away from Emma. The child's progress had been astonishing, her confidence growing, her laughter returning. She'd begun signing entire stories, even performing them for her classmates. Each time, Clara felt her heart swell with pride, but even pride couldn't drown out the whispers. One morning, as Clara was writing lesson plans at her desk, Principal Dawson knocked gently on the door. His tone was apologetic, his expression heavy. "Clara," he said, closing the door behind him, "there's talk around town about your relationship with Mr. Thorne. I know it's probably nonsense, but you might want to—" "Be careful," her stomach dropped. "We're not—" She stopped, realizing her voice had gone too sharp. "It's not like that. I'm helping Emma, that's all." "I believe you," the principal said kindly, "but gossip has a way of twisting the truth. Protect yourself." That night, Clara sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the flickering light of her reading lamp. She'd done nothing wrong, and yet she felt like she'd been caught doing something she couldn't explain. The thought of not seeing Emma again, not helping her learn, made her chest ache. The next day, Jacob came to the school unexpectedly. His face was stormy, his movements tense. "I heard what they're saying," he said, standing in the empty classroom after the final bell. "About us." Clara froze, unable to meet his eyes. "It doesn't matter," she said quickly. "It'll pass." "It does matter," he said, voice low. "They're talking about you, about your character." "That's not right." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And what would you have me do, Mr. Thorne?" "Stop teaching? Stop caring for your daughter because people can't mind their own business?" Jacob's anger softened instantly. "That's not what I meant. I just hate seeing you hurt by this." Her voice trembled. "I knew this would happen." "People don't understand quiet things, Jacob. They always think there has to be something more, something scandalous, when 2 people simply care." He took a step closer, his expression gentling. "Maybe there is something more," he admitted. The room seemed still. For a long moment, neither spoke. Clara's heart beat so loud she thought he might hear it. But before she could respond, Emma's laughter echoed down the hallway, bright and innocent. The sound pulled them both back to reality. Jacob stepped back, the distance between them thick with everything left unsaid. "I'll handle the gossip," he said finally, his tone firm. "No one should hurt you for being kind," Clara shook her head. "You can't stop people from talking," she smiled sadly. "But you can stop me from giving them reason to." And with that, she gathered her papers and turned away, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken feelings. Outside, the wind carried the sound of whispers through the schoolyard. But as she watched Emma waiting by the gate, smiling and signing, "See you tomorrow," Clara knew she couldn't let rumors silence what truly mattered. The bond they had built from love, trust, and quiet understanding. Still, as Jacob's truck pulled away and her reflection trembled in the window glass, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something fragile had cracked, not yet broken, but close. The rain began as a whisper that afternoon, soft, uncertain, like the calm before something long overdue. By dusk, Maplewood Elementary was wrapped in gray clouds and silver sheets of water. Most teachers had gone home, but Miss Clara Hayes stayed behind, mopping up a leak that had started dripping from the ceiling near the window. The hallways were silent except for the sound of rain on the roof. Outside, the playground swings creaked in the wind, their chains clinking like faint bells. Clara wrung the mop one last time and sighed, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. She didn't hear the footsteps until a voice spoke behind her, deep, familiar and unexpected. "Let me help." She turned sharply, startled. Standing in the doorway, his shoulders dusted with rain, was Jacob Thorne. His white shirt clung to him, darkened by water, his hair dripping onto the floor. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked, confused. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside, his boots echoing softly. Emma forgot her sketchbook. "She said it was important." His voice was steady, but his eyes told another story. Worry, guilt, something heavier. Clara bent to pick up the fallen bucket. "You didn't have to come all this way in this weather," she said, not meeting his gaze. "Couldn't let her go to sleep crying," he said simply. Then quieter. "Besides, I needed to see you." That last sentence hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Clara froze, her breath catching. "Jacob," she said softly, "please don't." He took another step forward. "I can't help it anymore." "You've changed everything, Emma's world and mine." She shook her head, backing away slightly, her hands trembling. "You don't mean that." "You're just grateful. That's all. Grateful?" he repeated, his tone deepening. "Do you think gratitude keeps a man up at night, wondering how a woman he barely knew became the first light in his life in years?" Her heart pounded. The rain outside grew louder, drumming against the windows like the world itself was listening. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice breaking. "People already talk. They'll ruin your name, they'll ruin mine." He took another step, his voice softer now. "Let them talk. They don't know what it's like to lose everything and find something worth believing in again." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "You don't understand. I can't be the reason Emma's world gets complicated again. She needs stability, or not scandal. Not love," he interrupted quietly. The word froze her. Love. It had never been spoken, but it had always been there, in his lingering glances, in Emma's newfound laughter, in the way her heart betrayed her every time his name was mentioned. Clara turned toward the window, her reflection blurred by raindrops. "You shouldn't say that." He stepped closer, stopping just behind her. His voice was a whisper against the storm. "Then tell me you don't feel it too." She swallowed hard. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she turned slowly, and for the first time, Jacob saw tears running freely down her cheeks. "I can't," she said. "Not because I don't, but because I do." For a moment, neither moved. The rain beat harder against the glass, a steady rhythm to the storm inside them. Then Jacob reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, reverent, as though afraid she might vanish if he held on too tightly. "You belong where you're understood," he whispered, signing the words as he spoke them. Clara's breath hitched. She understood the signs and the meaning behind them. Tears mingled with the rain that had slipped through the open window. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I wish we'd met in another life, one where it didn't hurt to feel this way." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes full of emotion he couldn't voice, then stepped back. "I'll wait for that life," he said quietly, and turned toward the door. As he left, the wind swept through the room, rustling the papers on her desk. Clara stood there, trembling, the echo of his voice and the warmth of his words lingering long after the door closed. And outside, under the relentless rain, Jacob paused once, looking up at the school window where the shy teacher stood, her silhouette framed in silver light, before walking away, knowing the storm between them had only just begun. The rain had passed, but its shadow lingered, in the puddles that mirrored gray skies, in the damp air that smelled faintly of earth and regret. For Miss Clara Hayes, the storm had done more than flood the school. It had flooded her heart. She hadn't slept much since that night with Jacob Thorne. His words still echoed in her mind. "You belong where you're understood." They were both beautiful and unbearable, because she did feel understood, seen even in ways she never had before. And that was precisely what terrified her. The rumors had only worsened since the rainstorm. Parents began questioning her professionalism. Notes appeared in her mailbox. Not cruel, but sharp enough to sting. "Be careful with that rancher. You're a teacher, not a charity." Principal Dawson called her into his office one morning. His tone was heavy with sympathy. "Clara, maybe it's time to take a break," he said. "Just until the noise dies down." But Clara heard what he didn't say aloud. They're not just whispering anymore. That night, she sat alone in her small apartment, the single lamp casting warm light across her worn wooden desk. A blank sheet of paper lay before her, and beside it, a small folded drawing Emma had given her earlier that day, 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun. Emma's careful handwriting spelled out "my family." Clara traced her fingers over the drawing, tears welling in her eyes. Family. How could a child so young understand what adults complicated so easily? She took a deep breath and began to write. "My dearest Emma, you are one of the brightest lights I have ever known. Your laughter, your drawings, your signs, they've made my classroom and my heart so much warmer. Sometimes grown-ups forget that love doesn't always need to be spoken to be real. You've reminded me of that. You've taught me that silence can be full of meaning, and kindness can change even the darkest hearts. If I'm not at school tomorrow, please don't be sad. I'll always be cheering for you, even from far away. Keep signing, keep smiling, and never stop believing that you can say anything and in any language, because your voice is beautiful. Emma, with all my love, Miss H." She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into Emma's backpack the next morning. Her hands shook as she did it. She wasn't leaving out of fear, but out of love. Love for Emma, and yes, love for Jacob. Staying would only bring them pain, and she couldn't bear to be the reason his daughter's world became clouded again. When she turned to see Jacob waiting by his truck that afternoon, her breath caught. He hadn't expected her to walk past without a word. But when she did, he sensed it, that something final was hidden in her silence. "Clara," he called, stepping toward her. She forced a small smile. "Take care of her, Jacob," she said softly. "She's going to change the world one day," he frowned. "Why does that sound like goodbye?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, the wind catching her skirt, her footsteps echoing faintly on the wet ground. Later that evening, as Jacob helped Emma unpack her school things, he found the letter tucked between her notebooks. The handwriting was neat, familiar. He began to read, and by the 3rd line his throat tightened. When he reached the end, he sank into a chair, the paper trembling in his hand. Emma climbed into his lap, confused, her small fingers brushing his cheek. "Where's Miss H?" she signed. Jacob swallowed hard, forcing a smile through the ache. He signed back. She had to go. But when Emma pressed a hand to his heart and signed, Come back soon? Jacob couldn't answer. He only held her close, eyes fixed on the letter that smelled faintly of rain. The same rain that had carried her away. Outside, the wind whispered through the ranch grass, carrying a promise that neither of them could yet see. That love, once spoken in silence, doesn't end with goodbye. For 3 long days, Jacob Thorne couldn't shake the silence that had replaced Clara Hayes's voice. It wasn't just absence. It was a hollow echo that lived in every corner of his home. Emma no longer ran into class with her usual excitement. Her drawings turned into gray scribbles. The laughter that used to fill the mornings had faded. "Where's Miss H?" She signed each night before bed, her small eyes pleading. Jacob would smile weakly, signing, "She's busy, sweetheart. She'll be back." But the lie weighed heavier each time he said it. By the 4th day, Jacob couldn't stand it anymore. He climbed into his truck before sunrise, the letter still folded in his jacket pocket. The paper was worn from the number of times he'd unfolded it, reading Clara's words over and over, as though somewhere between the lines she had hidden a clue. Her note had ended with "keep signing." Keep smiling. Those words felt like a goodbye. But Jacob refused to believe it was the end. Not when every inch of his ranch, every corner of his heart, still carried her touch. He drove to the school first, but the classroom was empty, the desk cleared, the soft drawings gone. Only the faint smell of chalk and lavender lingered in the air. "Where is she?" he asked Principal Dawson. The older man sighed, glancing away. "Miss Hayes turned in her resignation 2 days ago. Said she needed time away. Something about a teaching fellowship in Portland." Jacob froze. "Portland?" "It's temporary," the principal said, trying to soften the blow. "She didn't leave because of you, Thorne. She left because of them." He didn't need to ask who them meant. The whispers, the stares, the same narrow eyes that never understood kindness without suspicion. By noon, Jacob was driving fast down the long highway that cut through the open plains. The sun blazed through the windshield, and dust swirled behind his truck like a ghost chasing him. He thought about the first time he saw her, the shy teacher with gentle hands signing hello to his daughter. He thought about the rain that had fallen between them, and how love had slipped from his grasp because he'd been too afraid to fight for it. Not this time. When he finally reached the small bus depot at the edge of town, his heart sank. A single bus idled at the station, engine humming, ready to leave. He ran toward it, breath ragged, boots slapping against the concrete. Inside the bus, Clara sat by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her hair was tucked behind her ear, her eyes staring at nothing, until movement outside made her look up. Jacob. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. But then he was there, pounding on the side of the bus, calling her name, "Clara!" "Don't go!" Passengers turned to stare. The driver frowned, half annoyed. But Clara's heart stopped at the sound of his voice. She rose quickly, clutching her bag, and rushed down the aisle. When she stepped off the bus, the world seemed to still. The dust, the wind, the noise, all of it faded. "Jacob," she breathed, rain or tears glistening in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. He just stepped closer, chest heaving. "I'm here because you're running from the wrong thing. You think leaving protects Emma, or me. But all you're doing is teaching her that love has to hide." Her lips trembled. "I didn't want to destroy what you built." "You didn't," he said softly. "You reminded me why I built it in the first place. For love, for family, for something real." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the rancher everyone whispered about, but a man standing in the open, willing to risk everything for her. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "Then we'll find out together," he said. For the first time, Clara didn't look away. She nodded, tears streaming freely now. He reached for her hand, calloused meeting gentle, and she let him hold it. The bus pulled away behind them, leaving only dust and silence. But this time, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was alive, the kind that speaks without words. that promises something worth waiting for. And as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Jacob and Clara stood side by side, knowing the hardest part of their story was behind them, and the truest part was only just beginning. The seasons turned again, the golden hues of autumn softening into the chill of early winter. At Thorn Ranch, life had settled into something quieter, steadier, the kind of peace that only comes after a long storm. It had been 6 months since that day at the bus station. 6 months since Jacob Thorne had caught Clara Hayes just before she disappeared from his life forever. 6 months of healing, of rebuilding, not just the ranch, but the fragile, beautiful family that had begun to form between them. Clara had taken a position teaching at a nearby special education center, a place that welcomed her, her methods, and her heart. Every afternoon, she drove out to the ranch, her little car kicking up dust down the same road she'd once driven away from. Emma would be waiting by the fence every time, her small hand signing wildly the moment she saw Clara's car. "Teacher! Teacher's here!" Except now Emma didn't call her Miss Hayes anymore. Now she called her Clara, and Clara, smiling through tears the first time she'd heard it, had knelt down and signed back. "You can call me anything you like, sweetheart." Those were the small things that built their world again. Moments so simple, yet so full of grace. That evening, the ranch glowed in the orange light of sunset. Horses moved lazily through the fields. The smell of bread drifted from the kitchen where Clara and Emma baked side by side. Jacob watched them from the porch, arms folded, a quiet smile playing on his lips. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel haunted by memory. It felt alive. "Dad!" Emma signed as she ran out, her flour-dusted hands waving excitedly. "Clara says I'm getting good at reading lips." Jacob grinned, crouching down to meet her eyes. "You're getting good at everything, little one." Clara followed a moment later, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a faint blush on her cheeks. "She insisted on making the whole loaf herself," she said, laughing softly. "It's a little burnt, but she's proud." Jacob's eyes softened. "So am I." They stood together watching Emma chase the cat through the yard, her laughter echoing across the fields. The wind carried it far, the sound of joy rediscovered. "You know," Clara said quietly, "sometimes I still think about that first day. When I signed hello and you were just watching from the door." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I wasn't just watching. I was falling." Clara smiled, looking away shyly, the same way she had back then. "You've always known what to say." He reached for her hand, rough and warm in his. "Not always. But I've learned that sometimes the best words are the ones we don't say." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sky turn from gold to deep violet. The first stars began to appear. Emma, sitting cross-legged on the porch steps, began to hum, a quiet, tuneless melody, her way of joining the stillness. Clara squeezed Jacob's hand. "She's come so far." "So have you," he said. "You taught her to find her voice again, and mine too." Clara blinked back tears. "And you taught me that love doesn't have to shout to be heard." He smiled, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two souls who had found home not in grand gestures, but in quiet understanding. As the night deepened, the three of them sat together on the porch, Jacob, Clara, and Emma, wrapped in a soft blanket, the stars glimmering overhead. Emma signed something sleepily. "Family?" Clara nodded, brushing the child's hair gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Family." Jacob leaned closer, his voice low, meant only for Clara. "You know, I used to think silence was emptiness," he whispered. "Now I know it's where love speaks the loudest." Clara smiled through her tears, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's promise never to stop listening." And there, under a sky full of stars, the shy teacher, the grieving rancher, and the little girl who spoke through her hands found what they had been searching for all along. Not perfection. Not forever, but something far rarer. Peace in the silence. Love that didn't need words.